Hello everyone, my name is Imani Cones and I will be doing my video presentation for EDSE 623. I will be presenting on Chapter 3 of Coercion and its Fallout entitled Ivory Laboratory or Glass House. For my presentation, I will begin each new point with a supporting quote from the text. Quote number 1. Many of our most serious troubles arise from our inability to predict and manage behavior. From this quote, Sidman leads into a discussion of how our behavior as a society has created unsubstantial damage to the environment and worldwide catastrophes. From pollution to war, our inability to manage our behavior, to come up with alternative solutions, and even self-regulate our own actions to ensure our own personal health has left us in a state of emergency. Behavior analysts study the management of behavior without promoting control. Quote number 2, which piggybacks off the first quote, but without one to show us how to change the ways we conduct our affairs, the world will die either from neglect or by suicide. I include that quote because I felt that it was very powerful and it fit perfectly with the examples I've provided. An example that I thought of, which I believe is also mentioned in another section of the chapter, is Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were two Japanese cities that were hit when the U.S. dropped the atomic bombs in 1945 during World War II. Besides the initial impact of the bombings, deaths occurred months after the bombings due to radiation. Approximately 200,000 people died between the two cities. So, how do you think our world will die? Neglect? Suicide? Will it be because of our inability to negotiate, to find alternative solutions? That's not my official open-ended question, just something I was curious to know if anyone wants to answer. Quote number 3, we use many different methods for changing our own and others' conduct. For example, formal education. It is an educator's duty to teach their students new skills and enable them to demonstrate those new skills. And a main way we do that is through control, correct? We change behavior, we teach new behavior, and we want our students to be able to show us that they've learned those new skills by displaying them in class and displaying them in real life. Another example is the family structure. From our family, we learn our values, and parents often set the standards for our behaviors. In addition, laws are put into place in our society to provide consequences for behavior deemed inappropriate by society. Lastly, we often take measures to maintain a sense of control. We set alarms and leave ourselves reminders in an attempt to be on time and functional in society. On this slide, I have provided a few examples and a few visuals. So, I thought of a few examples of things we do and others do and society does to control behavior. For example, I use alarms, sticky notes, and my handy Google Calendar to keep track of absolutely everything. My alarms tell me when to wake up, what important things not to forget. My sticky notes tell me what to do when I get to the place my alarm reminded me to go. My Google Calendar tells me what I should be reading, what I should be studying, and what is due. I use all of this to self-regulate my own behavior. In addition, my family has set rules of respect, honesty, and responsibility and positivity for me to abide by, and I included this nice little visual that I found via Google Images. Lastly, without the consequences of society, for example, a speeding ticket, who among us would not go over the speed limit when late? We, along with society, have put rules, consequences, in place to control behavior. This makes me wonder how much of what we attribute as our own self-control, our own self-management, is truly ours, and how much of it's really influenced by society. Quote number 4, the products of laboratory research has profoundly altered human existence. Laboratory research has allowed for a level of control and experimentation where interfering factors can be eliminated and causal relationships can be determined. Measurement control consistency and accuracy, facilitated by testing conditions, separates mere assumptions from evidence-based results. Contrary to popular belief, we are able to mimic real-world conditions in the laboratory setting. Laboratories remove what is irrelevant and focus in on specific conditions that influence behaviors and uncover how the world functions. One example that the chapter provided that I thought was really cool on page 58 is how airplane models are tested in an artificial wind tunnel prior to being flown by airline pilots. And on the following slide, I included a few images. The question I have remaining after reading this section is, what other groundbreaking inventions were first tested in a lab, inventions that could not be otherwise tested? Quote number 5, consequences determine behavior. It must apply to all conduct, to all species, and to any kind of consequence. Are these generalizations correct? How do we determine generalizability? From mouse to man, lab to society. Most simply put, we must test it across subjects, behaviors, and consequences. Validation only takes place through repeated experimentation, removing and replacing conditions until we can say without a shadow of a doubt the cause of a behavior. Consequences shape our development of behaviors. For example, the scenario on page 63. A child asks for a cookie. The parent ignores the child's request. The child kicks, screams, and scratches. The parents give the child the cookie. Unknowingly, the nonverbal communication teaches the child the cycle in which their wants will be met, thus reinforcement. Page 64 begs the question of how many of us would continue to work our jobs without a paycheck. This was a tricky one for me, simply because in our society, right, you need a paycheck to live. And I think in a sense, no matter how much we love our jobs, there are those conditions, these, consequences of life if we can't pay our bills that we have to think of at the same time. Consequences, positive or negative, shape our behavior and our society as a whole. From mouse to mankind, this holds true. And I included this cute little image that says, we'll press lever for food. If you've read through the chapter, you can kind of get a sense of how this connects. Quote number 6, one may regard a particular consequence that an act produces as positive or negative, good or bad, important, trivial, or even neutral. This particular section emphasizes that the world seems to regard consequences as the negative effects of one's actions. How often have we heard you did this, and we're meaning a bad thing? So these are the consequences. The world seems to forget that every action, good or bad, has a consequence. For example, what might the consequences be for failing to study? You might fail a quiz or a test, or you might even fail the whole class. Then in contrast, what is the consequences for studying hard? You might get an A, you might improve your grade. So good or bad, your behaviors have consequence. Especially in education and even parenting, we tend to put a negative connotation on consequences. Consequences tend to be mentioned in reference to bad behaviors as opposed to good. The book points out that our behavior seems to be under the control of negative consequences, which reflects the impact of coercion in our lives. We work to stop negative behaviors as opposed to increasing positive behaviors. And I included this nice little visual. This is some positive reinforcement. Great job. Excellent. Okay, so I do have a few remaining questions after reading the chapter. So my first question, can we as a society come together in an impactful way to solve world issues, such as the conversion to renewable energy sources, putting aside costs to create a better future? The book discussed how we've had this conversation about switching to renewable resources for so long, but because renewable resources, the initial switch is going to cost money, so many people have kind of turned it away, even though in the long run, this would be the most beneficial resource. So could we put away the initial cost for the greater good of the future? Is coercion as it applies to education, law, and self-control a positive thing? Is education and the skills that we learn, even if they are through coercion, is that still a positive effect? Is there a different way that we could teach? So these are questions I had remaining. And next I will introduce you guys to my open-ended question. that I would like you all to answer. How do you use behavior control as a form of self-management in your own life? So I know that I mentioned my obsession with alarms and sticky notes and writing down everything, so I absolutely don't forget. I would like to know what are some of the methods you put into your own life, because I know everyone's structure is different, and I thought this would be a great way to end this discussion. Once again, this was my presentation over Chapter 3 of Sidman, Ivory Laboratory, our glass house. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.